Welcome to the second episode of the Existential Stoic podcast. I am Danny.
And I'm Randy.
Hi, Randy.
Yeah.
So today we're going to talk about anxiety and happiness. We'll talk about anxiety first, then happiness, and go from there.
Yeah, so we figured that this would be a pretty good topic for right now because a lot of people, they want happiness in their life, but for one reason or another, especially in these trying times of COVID, are abound with anxiety. So let's talk about anxiety.
Yeah, more anxiety in our lives at all times. We're anxious about everything. I mean, I talk to people, they are anxious literally about everything. And, it's interesting, too, because I think, a big source of that is we have so much information to process every day. That is, things that are way beyond our control and our ability to control, that causes anxiety. Yeah,
I think a good place to start is a definition of anxiety.
Yeah, that is a good place.
And so, according to the Google Dictionary, anxiety is a feeling of worry, nervousness, or unease, typically about an imminent event or something with an uncertain outcome.
It's a good definition.
Yeah, and I think right now a lot of people are finding it a lot because there's nervousness, worry, unease about an imminent event or something with an uncertain outcome. Nobody knows what's going to happen with coronavirus.
No, everything feels uncertain right now, right? It feels like, will we return back to normal? Will we deal with the pandemic? I mean, we have the election coming up, which is uncertain in a sense. I mean, everything, even, people's jobs, their livelihood feels uncertain, and that is a scary position to be in.
Yeah. And I was talking with my dad about this earlier. It's really interesting recently, these wars that we go against. It used to be like back World War II, it was the Allies versus the Axis. Very clearly defined enemies. You knew who your enemies were. They were not you.
Knew the
they
size.
Were somebody else.
They were in uniform. They were in uniform. They weren't us. They were the other.
Yeah. And you could go attack them. Nowadays, we have the war on terror, the war against cancer, the war against the virus,
the war on drugs,
all these intangible things that really are completely out of your sphere of control. They're nothing that you can do. How can you go attack a virus? Show me where a virus is.
Yeah. Not to mention too, when you phrase it like that too, there's no clear end to the war, right? Because even if like take a war on a virus, right? Even if you say you somehow defeat that virus, whatever the hell that means, there's still going to be other viruses, right? There's still going to be other sickness. So it's not like you ever defeat it. That's a dream that you can't achieve.
Yeah, it's insane because there are viruses that are in our bodies all the time. Chicken pox, okay? People get that virus all the time. Nobody cares. Flu. Everybody gets that virus all the time. Most causes of diarrhea, rotavirus, norovirus. People get those all the time. Nobody cares. They actually kill more people than COVID has killed. Nobody talks about it. The virus in everybody's mind is COVID, which in my mind kind of goes back to HIV. When that first came out, it was this big stigmatized virus that everybody thought if you went into the same room as a gay person, you'd get it, and everybody was just lose off the rocker. And it seems like that's
terrified.
The same thing
Well,
happening.
they were terrified too, the scare tactic, right? The fear. Now, I think too, the interesting thing about that too is HIV, right, definitely is a much more serious, and at the time was way more serious, right? The death rate was very high, and it was, a very deadly disease. Now, though, it is very treatable. But, like, when you look at coronavirus and you look at the numbers, it's not nearly as dangerous. It's probably more along the lines of a flu, maybe a bad flu. It's contagious, but, that's any virus. I mean, it's going to be contagious.
And most of the deaths early on were because we were treating people in a wrong manner because we didn't know how to do it. We were killing them with respirators.
Yeah.
And then they find out you give them an antiviral, a steroid, and oxygen, and they're fine.
Yeah. But, it's interesting. So the anxiety we feel in life, I mean, there's so many sources of anxiety. We were talking about this before, too, just on our own, that, we've both had panic attacks before, and, that sort of where you get into a sort of a mode or a state of being where you start imagining sort of possibilities and you play them out real fast, and they're always really negative and really like the world's ending, or like you'll never get out of this position, and everything suddenly feels hopeless. It's almost like, in a way, I think like panic attacks are very much like almost like an existential crisis right at that moment instead of like, prolonged. And it's interesting because how do we deal with anxiety? How do we address it? And how do we live in a world where there's so much sort of causes for anxiety, I guess? Maybe that's a way to look at this.
Yeah, and the times that I've had panic attacks, it very much reminded me of, I had a couple bad trips on mushrooms, and it very much reminded me of that. And the crazy thing about mushrooms is if you change your headspace, change your location, go for a walk, it completely changes what's going on. And I've found the same thing with panic attacks. If you just get out of the environment that you're in where you're having the panic attack, move somewhere, go walk in nature, throw some cold water on your face, do something, generally things change. But if you just sit there and brood and ruminate and it gets worse and worse and worse, that's just a bad path to go.
Well, it'll just keep getting worse. And it's a good point, right? Because when you're in a panic attack, you're panicking, you're thinking it through and you're imagining things. So moving from that situation to somewhere else, changing the environment, it has a dramatic effect because you change your perspective. It gives you a chance to sort of hopefully think about things differently. That's why breathing techniques work. Anything that gets you to concentrate on something else. A lot of times, I know when I was younger, and I had them a lot when I was in high school, I had a doctor recommend to me doing breathing exercises, where you control your breathing, you count, because it basically forces you to focus. Like you said, cold water, right? That splash changes your, attention.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what's interesting about anxiety is it is very much in our thoughts, right? It's in our mind.
Yeah.
It's our perspective on things that's making us anxious. And there is outside factors involved, obviously, like maybe triggers, but they're not necessarily the cause, or they're not necessarily the anxiety itself. There may be like, things that might be a catalyst for it.
Yep. And also what comes along with that is when you get stuck in a panic attack, it's very much an individual event. And you forget to realize that many other people suffer from this type of thing.
Yeah.
Especially right now. Like, a lot of people are going through it. And just reminding yourself of that you're not alone. Calling up a friend and talking to them about it. Like, that's one thing that Danny and I have done is, fortunately, we've been able to talk with each other pretty much every week about this type of stuff because we're both going through it together, and I'm sure a lot of you are as well.
Well, it helps immensely, right? And I think it's interesting because, you're right. You it's easy to start feeling alone when you're not going out like you used to. The world seems, everybody keeps saying on the news, they were saying it every other day, like the new normal, right? This whole idea that reality has fundamentally changed or shifted, right? And it's very dramatic. And you feel stuck at home, you can't see people, or you're concerned, right? Because justifiably, with a virus going around that we don't know anything about, I don't want to go see my pregnant sister or my elderly grandmother or something because God forbid, right? So there is an anxiety there, but there's things you can do too. Even if you can't see them, you can talk to them, remind yourself you're not alone, and try and just think differently, which is not always easy, but it is possible.
Now here's another thing that I was thinking, because I'll be honest, I have kind of a conspiracy theorist in me. But, okay, so when we look at the way that we torture people at like Guantanamo or all these other places.
I'm interested to see where this is going.
Yeah. We do waterboarding and solitary confinement. Those are like two of the worst tortures that we can put people through.
We use solitary constantly in prisons. Yeah, constantly.
Well, look at what we're doing with this virus. We're basically waterboarding everybody to a mild degree with these masks they have to wear. It restricts your breathing just enough to be uncomfortable for as long as you have to wear it. And then everybody gets quarantined. You go anywhere, you get quarantined. You do this, you get quarantined. Solitary confinement. And look at these two torture devices that are being used against everybody in just a mild enough degree to cause this unnecessary tension or anxiety or apprehension in basically everybody. So our nerves are on edge because we're just basically being mildly tortured to a bearable enough degree that it's like I was reading in this book, there was a study where they took some sheep and they put an electrode around their leg, and they found out that if they shock them often enough, and if they preceded that shock by like a bell by a few seconds, so they would ring a bell and then shock them, that eventually the sheep would just give up.
Oh yeah, they did. It's learned helplessness. They psychologists did studies actually on that. I think it was in the 50s with dogs, where they actually made the floor electrified, and the dogs were unable to escape from the shock. And so what they would do is they would shock them. The dogs would try to get out, And they found that over time they just stopped bothering. They just dealt with it, right? And just basically, suffered through it. It's interesting, I guess, because the animal realizes, right, that there's no hope, and this external thing is not going to go away. It's sort of, and with what you just said about the whole like torture thing, though, I think from another perspective too, though, I think one of the other issues is, we've gone through, we've as a country and as individuals, this whole virus thing has been navigated in a way with no clear sort of plans. Everything's been sort of, from the hip. And, and granted, I understand, like, with science and stuff, things change as we're learning about something new. But it was all very sort of piecemeal and, like, thrown together, And I think that also caused a lot of anxiety because people were unsure about, like, what they should do, right? And they weren't communicating the information in an effective, clear way. And I think that also, but this also goes to another problem in our country, which is, you have social media, you have 24-hour news cycles, you have, you have these news programs that are backed by interested parties, and a lot of it is just opinion. It's not actually, in a sense like news, right, where it's not factually based journalism. And so, you have a lot of problems with that too, where I think the information we're getting is very nerve-wracking and anxiety-prone because they want you to watch. And the easiest way to get people to watch something, right, is to scare them, to get them interested and focused.
Yeah, so, my anxiety level has raised since starting this recording. So,
oh my God.
So, what opportunities exist for people? Because, there's that old thing they say about, in Chinese, the word opportunity and crisis are the same word. In every crisis, there's an opportunity. We're in the middle of a crisis. So there's got to be an opportunity here for us to overcome, to become better people from it.
That's a good point too, because I actually have been thinking about that a lot this week on unrelated things. But I've been looking at a lot of the philosophies that I just am interested in. I've been looking back over some stuff, and it's interesting how many ethicists and philosophers focus on really questioning the values that we give to things like suffering, distress, dissatisfaction, fear. Because we normally think of those things as highly negative, and we tend to avoid them. But, a lot of these thinkers, these great thinkers who spent their whole lives thinking about the good life and things like that, and how to live a good life, they really saw them as actually valuable. As every time there's distress or dissatisfaction or fear, there's an opportunity to overcome, right? There's an opportunity for self-development, for betterment, for figuring out something about you. And it is hard to see these things as opportunities sometimes because it's, you're living through it. But, if you think back on your own life, many times, like when we look back on our own past, we look at sometimes our worst times when we get out of those worst times as being also the best, right? Where we learn so much about who we are and we figure out what we're capable of.
Yeah, I think perspective is very important. And what you mentioned there, like while you were saying that, I was thinking about, in these trying times that we have right now, and I say that with big mockery, but in these trying times, I love how everything in these trying times.
Oh, I love how the news reports, man.
Yep. And so, in these trying times, so many people lose perspective, and I do it too because you just want to get through this thing, and like getting through the day is tough.
You just want it to end. Yeah, you just want it to be over with, dude.
Yeah. But here's a little perspective exercise. So let's say you live a nice full life, 90 years old. Right now the life expectancy is like 72 or 76. Let's say by the time you die it's 90 years old. So you live to be 90 years old. How many years do you have left? All right? Now in that number of years, project yourself into that future. You're there on your deathbed, surrounded by friends and family, and you look back, will you actually even remember this? Will it be more than just a momentary something to laugh at? You'll laugh at it, be like, remember that? When everybody wore masks, everybody was scared of this COVID. Remember when they ran out of toilet paper? And so, like, having the perspective to be able to look at that, because it's so easy to get lost in the minutiae, lost in what's going on right now, and completely lose perspective.
No, it's a good point, right? Having perspective sometimes, it's funny, like, this happens to Randy and I all the time. We'll be talking and one of us will be venting about something, and the other one will give perspective, right? You know, kind of chime in and give an understanding of the situation that's different because they're an outsider. They're not, you know, even we know each other very well. Obviously, we've been friends forever, but we're not living through our own stress and anxiety, right? You know, and that helps a lot. So sometimes too, talking to somebody else, or like you said too, when you project forward and think of that time you have left, you know, and you think of all you can do too, because I think about that sometimes. You know, I think back on my past. I'm like, you know, I wish I did this, that, or more. And then I look at my future. I'm like, I have all this time to do that. And not only that, you know, I spent much of my past too as a child and stuff where I couldn't do anything anyway.
Right.
I have all my knowledge and all my, you know, skill sets and everything now that I can utilize. So there's a lot to, I think, be hopeful or hopeful for as well.
Yeah. And I mean, what you're saying with having someone to talk to, I think that's so important. Like, I've seen studies, and I don't know these recently, but like they said that like in the 80s and in the 90s, the number of people who would mark on these studies that they had a few close friends that they could tell everything to, you know, was most of the population. Yeah. Whereas they do that again nowadays, and it's like nobody.
Yeah, it's a shame, right?
And just having someone to talk to, because like, and it doesn't even need to be a friend. Like, a lot of people have difficult times making friends. If you have a difficult time making friends, find a counselor. Like, log on to BetterHelp and get help with a counselor. I do that myself, and it's super helpful because it's just perspective. Problems are so much easier when they're not your own problems.
When you have somebody else to look at it, somebody else to confide in and talk to. You know, and sometimes you might not. Also, too, sometimes I know even with friends and family, sometimes you don't want to burden them or you feel uncomfortable for whatever reason, you know. So seeking out a third party is sometimes very helpful. You know, they're outside. You're not burdening them in any way. It's easy. It's interesting too, that point you made though about friendship and like, you know, what people will mark down, because it seems like since social media, you know, it's like we've had more connections but less meaningful connections.
Right.
You know, whereas like before even, you know, cell phones and stuff and all in the internet and social media, like you might have interacted with less people, but you did it in a way that was more fulfilling, more nurturing. You know, you know, I remember calling friends when I was younger. I mean, I still do this now. We do this, but you know, you talk on the phone for 2 hours, you know, and you might not have talked every day or anything, but like once a month or something, but you talk for a while and it's very like, you know, it's in depth and you really do like listen. And we don't seem to do that as much anymore.
Yeah. It's interesting because the technology that has come about kind of shadows the paradox of life, where like these technologies were supposed to make our life simpler and give us more free time. And they've made our life so much more complex and given us so much less free time because we're so occupied by all these things going on. And social media, which was supposed to connect us so much more, has in fact done the exact opposite.
Well, you know what's funny? It actually, if I could bring up something you said this, I don't know if this is probably when we were just talking, but we were talking about, you know, happiness and like, you know, a lot of times like we'll feel happy in a situation doing something. But then when somebody asks us if we are happy, like as soon as you ask the question, right? And then you start to think about it, it's like all of a sudden now that you're thinking about it, now you're not so sure, right? And it's like, I think maybe that's also part of it, because with this connectedness and we see all this stuff so often, all these things on social media, we're interacting with other people, we see all these things that we question ourselves way more and kind of like question in the sense of like, you know, evaluative judgments. Am I doing well? Am I doing this? You know, what do I need to do? So forth and so on. And like, as we do that, it's more negative.
Yeah. And we compare our lives and all the shit we have to go through with somebody else's curated life.
Yeah.
With the high points of their life. And I think
that's the problem too, the curated, you know, the aspect of it where everything is put together in a certain way to portray something.
Yeah. And I think you really see it when you hear about celebrities that, like Chris Farley overdose, Robin Williams suicide, Justin Bieber severely depressed, and you see these people and you're like, but they have everything. How could
billions
they
of
feel
dollars?
that way?
Yeah. How they have like the best life we could imagine, right? Or it seems like it.
Because all you're seeing is their curated life. You're not seeing the fullness of their life, and more than that, you're not experiencing it. And
well, you know, there's a great quote, and actually, well, it's actually in the Bible, but it's also Kierkegaard says this as well. You know, he says, Kierkegaard, I'll use his phrasing. He says, without earnestness of spirit, like without knowing yourself, you can win the whole world and lose yourself. Right? Yeah. So you could do really well in life. You could ostensibly do well by the societal standards. You could make tons of money. You could be famous. You could have all these things. It doesn't mean you know who you are. It doesn't mean you're happy, right? Those are kind of external markers. They're not an internal gauge of where you're at.
Yeah. So I think we should probably talk about happiness, because that's seems like the next place to go with this. Because I mean, you and me were both kind of looking at a book about finding our North Star, trying to figure out what that is. Because we had a conversation not too long ago where it's just like, I mean, where am I going with life? What am I doing?
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because when you think about it, like, I think I've struggled with this my whole life, where you want to live a good life. Everybody does. Everybody wants to be happy. Everybody wants a good life. But those things are both hard to define. In part, I think, because they're probably different for everyone, so that makes it difficult. The other thing too that I think I struggle with my life is I look at societal markers for like how you're doing. Like they tell us, oh, go to school, graduate high school, go to college, graduate college, get a job, get married, kids, whatever. And like if those things don't fit your life, or they don't fit who you are, like children, for instance, I'll be honest, I don't want kids. So like that kind of thing, it's difficult then to start seeing yourself on those markers, and you're left with your own evaluation, but that's hard to figure out, right? Like, it's hard to know, because that's the problem. Like, you want to be certain.
Yeah, and I think no more evidence than the difficulty to define happiness comes from typing in happiness definition in Google, and it says the state of being happy.
There you go. That's clear.
So then if you look up happy definition, it says feeling or showing pleasure or contentment.
Actually, yeah. I want to talk about happiness, the definition, for a minute, because this is one of the problems, right, with happiness, is how do you define it? I think, I've taught ethics a lot, and good life, is a big focus of that. And a lot of people, I think, in our country, and anyway in the present day, they think of happiness associated with like a state of joy or pleasure that's sustained. And I think that in and of itself is problematic. You look at good life theorists. A lot of times they associated a good life with success, well-being. A different sort of scale, right, or metrics for what a good life was, because they weren't just thinking about your mental state. They were thinking broadly, right? Character. How well do you deal with ups and downs in life? Those sorts of things. To think of it just as a pleasurable state. I mean, first of all, life isn't that, right? Life is change. So to think of it as a sustained state is very weird. Yeah. It makes no sense. But it's also, I think, in part because, right, when we think of the times that we felt our best, that's kind of what we remember, right? You remember feeling a lot of joy and excitement, and that would be great to feel like that all the time. Yeah. But, it's not also practical or realistic, I guess.
And each thing exists because of its opposite. So like these feelings of pleasure only exist because of the lack of pleasure. And so there's this idea of sustained pleasure, of things are going to be going great all the time. Not a great definition. However, the other thing that says here, feeling or showing contentment. I think contentment is a much better guide than pleasure.
Well, contentment is interesting too, though, right? Because contentment suggests, right, if you're contented with things, you're satisfied with them, right? You have your needs and wants met. And that's important. I think that's absolutely important. It's interesting, and I think I'm coming at this from a philosophical standpoint, so I apologize, because I know it's like, it's interesting. For instance, the utilitarians, John Stuart Mill, thought dissatisfaction was crucial for a happy life. And he thought, because, he has a very famous quote where he says it's better to be a human being dissatisfied than a pig satisfied.
I've hated that quote since the very beginning.
Well, it's funny, because essentially what he means is he's trying to make a distinction between contentedness and happiness. So a pig can be contented because he can have all of his desires and wants met. You could fabricate that for him, right? But a human being, dissatisfaction is the recognition of something that needs to be improved upon, right? To change a state of affairs, to make it better. And Mill at least thinks that's part of what human beings do, right? We constantly sort of look at our world, assess it, and want to make it better. And that's part of a good life. So for him, it's part of the journey of it. But maybe that's also a problem. Maybe that's not a good definition. I just wanted to bring it up, but it might not be a good one for us. I don't know.
Yeah, I've always hated that, because at any time I would prefer to be satisfied than dissatisfied.
I know, it is funny, right? Because it sounds counterintuitive. Like, why would you want to be dissatisfied, or why? But again, this is that idea of evaluating fear, suffering, struggle differently, right? Because when we see dissatisfaction or when we struggle, it's an opportunity to overcome and learn about ourselves.
Yeah.
And I think this also depends on how you define the good life or happiness. Is it associated with like authenticity and self-realization, or is it something else? Because if it is associated with like your real self or your whatever, however the hell you define that, then I think those moments can be looked at positively because we do learn who we are, right? It's when you're faced with, difficulties in life, I think, that you do find yourself in ways that you wouldn't have otherwise.
Yeah, and you get to grow, and it's the whole thing of character that we talk about.
Yeah.
One habit that I picked up recently was Ben Franklin's 13 Virtues, keeping those on a note card and keeping them in my pocket and looking at them every day, because that's building up character. Like I'm 37 now. For all of my life that I can remember, it's always been this pursuit of money, and it's a very futile pursuit.
Well, it's funny because you mentioned all those famous individuals who were struggling in life, who we look at and think they have a great life because they have, principally because they have money, right? Yeah. And like, that's one of the issues in our country, I think, as well, is it's a capitalist, consumerist culture. Money seems like the solution to every problem, and it's not. And thinking that way is problematic.
It's the easiest thing to measure.
Yeah, it is. It's the easiest thing to measure. It's a direct measurement. And yes, don't get me wrong. Like, I absolutely, I believe that you need a certain amount of money to live in this world, right? And you need your basic needs met. You need to be able to have fun, so forth and so on. So you do need an income and you need money, but the excess of it, or money for its own sake, just having it, doesn't really solve anything.
Yeah, they've shown study after study that after a certain amount of money, depending upon your country and where you live, the more money you have has a diminishing return. There's no added benefit to it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense too, right? If you make, say, like, we'll just an example. If you make $20,000 a year and you get a $10,000 raise, that's going to make a big increase, right? Because now a lot changes. If you make $80,000 and you get a $10,000 raise, not so much. It's like not as much change. Your basic needs you're not struggling with eating or living or anything like that.
Yeah. So I guess the question would be, how does one be happy? How does one cultivate happiness?
Yeah, let's answer that. That's easy.
In these trying times.
There we go. In these fucking trying times, in this new normal. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's I've been thinking about this so much. Like, happiness is such an interesting thing in the good life. We all want it, but none of us seem to know what the hell it is.
And it's something they've been struggling with for
literally.
Years.
Don't feel bad either. I should mention that. Yeah, literally, since human beings have written things down in a coherent way, this question has been sort of plaguing us, right? How do you be happy? I mean, philosophy is literally like, almost all of philosophy is a study of happiness in the good life. How do you live a good life? How do you be happy? What do you need to do? I mean, that's ethics, right? Ethics is about being a better person.
One thing that I like to look at is, so that question, how do I be happy? That presupposes that you're not happy right now.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And so I like to sometimes look at it like, how do I recognize my happiness now? Because if you don't have something now and you think once you get there, you'll be happy, then you get there, you have that same mindset, and then once you're there at that happiness thing, you'll think you need something else. Like, I remember from my own life, when I was in undergrad, I was studying physics, super difficult, but I did it because it was hard, which is a stupid reason to do it.
Terrible reason, but yeah, whatever.
And so, but I remember I was having a talk with my roommate. I was like, man, these studies are so hard. Like, once I'm a veterinarian, then everything will be great. Like, all I need to do is become a vet, and then everything will be great. And here I am, a vet. And
nothing's changed in that respect.
And I'm like, once I do this, then it'll be great.
Well, it's funny, we tell ourselves that too, right? We give ourselves these projects, and which is good, right? Because that's a good project, becoming a vet. You're learning a lot, you're developing a good skill set, whatever. But we give ourselves these projects and we imagine like, oh, once this is done, then there won't be any more struggle, no more things to do. But life is it's the doing of stuff, right? I mean, it's
and
active.
The struggle.
Yeah, it's a constant struggle of living, right? It's constantly doing things, constantly growing. And I think we act like happiness is this end goal. And maybe you're right, to say like, it's an absurd way to look at it maybe, because we're thinking about an end, not the journey. And life is the journey. It's not like we magically get happiness and then we die.
Yeah.
It's the journey of it, and we need to figure out how to be happy while we're doing it. not, when we achieve something.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's also, that is also another point with our culture, right? Looking at happiness in terms of consuming, in terms of money, or in terms of, productivity, right? Once I do X, or as long as I'm productive, I'm doing well or whatever, these associations, we confuse or equate them with happiness, and it's not. And we find ourselves always wanting, right? And that's part of the issue.
Yeah. So I would say, because maybe happiness isn't like a binary thing. It's not an on or off. Maybe there's like degrees of happiness. There's like 50 shades of happiness.
50 shades of happiness.
Yeah. But anyways, like you can see, because for instance,
I wonder what color that would be.
Magenta. Yeah.
Anyway.
One of these grays. Like for instance, I have some issues with some chronic pain, and so when I'm in pain, one of the exercises that I do is what parts of my body are feeling good. Like what parts aren't in pain, and be grateful for that.
It's funny. I struggled with pretty severe depression for a while, in these past 8 years or so of my life. I was struggling with it on and off for a while. And one of the things I learned to do too is actually, it's interesting, but when I was having panic attacks or in a severely depressed state, I would try and get myself to do like one thing and be grateful for it, that I got that one thing done that day. At least I did this. Or I'd try to look at my life and, instead of looking at all the bad, try and look at what was good about it. Like even if it's stupid things, like simple things, like, okay, I have a bed, I have a house to sleep in, right? Stuff like that you can be grateful for, because it's something to be grateful for, right?
Yeah.
Or like, I don't have to worry about food or something, whatever, whatever it is, it works, right?
Yeah, all this stuff we take for granted.
Yeah, and
like just food. We were talking about this earlier. The excess of food that we have in this country and in the world is the first time in humanity's history, hundreds of thousands of years, where we have an excess of
where
food.
Food's an afterthought, dude. Like you don't even have to plan it. You can just go to Wawa and go or whatever and grab something. And like, before it was, you had to always know what was you're gonna eat, right? Where you're gonna eat, how you're gonna make it, how you're gonna get it. Like,
and then if you have a bad season, you have a drought or a hailstorm or something like that, you could die.
Yeah, literally, because you don't have food.
Yeah.
Or you're eating one thing. I mean, the potato famine.
Yeah.
Right?
Right?
It's insane.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting though, and like, I think being grateful is important. You see that a lot too, and I know like there's a lot of different like either spirituality or philosophical or even psychological studies have shown that like cultivating a sense of gratefulness is important, because it's really a recognition of what's going okay. Right? And what's decent in your life. And I think that's important to recognize when you're, thinking about life and thinking about happiness.
Yeah, and so looking at happiness, another thing is, so we have these trying times right now, okay? A new normal. But how you can either react to it or you can respond to it. It can either be the worst times of your life, or it could be the defining moments of your life. Like if you look at the Depression back in the early 1900s, many of the biggest companies nowadays were born during the Depression. Ford Motor Company, born during the Depression. A lot of other ones born during the Depression, because they chose to make the best of it. Like everybody's stuck at home, everybody's quarantined. Well, guess what? There's more information at your fingertips than ever before. You can earn a whole entire degree right now in your spare time while you're stuck at home. So like using this time to redefine yourself, because guess what? The world's going to move forward. Yeah,
it will. Eventually things are going to move forward and things will change again, right? That's what always happens. It's interesting too, I think, that, another, oh my God, I just lost my train of thought. Damn it.
And now a message from our sponsor.
Yeah, right? No, but we're, I hate when that happens. But anyway, yeah. But no, self-development, working on ourselves is obviously important. I think that's a big part of it. Being grateful. But also, too, I think, how would you define happiness? Let's start there. Maybe we could each define it and go from there. See if we can come up with a definition.
Happiness. Oh, for me, I mean, happiness is like this. Okay, so here, there's the definition of happiness, which is completely illusory, and then there's what happiness actually is. So like
That's fair.
the completely illusory definition of happiness is this like sunshine and rainbows and unicorns and everything's perfect and just skipping along, no pain, no difficulties, everything I want just instantly manifested.
Well, it's the end of a movie, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
Yeah, and the real definition of happiness, I think it goes along with like the choosing of what you want your life to be, and the constant pursuit of that. The ability to go for it and put yourself out there and give it a whirl.
No, I think that's a good way to look at it, and I kind of remember what I was going to say. It's actually on this note anyway. Because one of the ways I always think about it is, one of the things we struggle with is we were talking about anxiety, right, and all these things outside of our control, and feeling lost or feeling like, alone or isolated, whatever. A big part of it, I think, is personal accountability and responsibility, starting to see ourselves as responsible for our lives, responsible for what's happening. And, it's hard to do that, I think, in a certain respect. It's hard to admit that we're responsible for things, but it's also really important because you start to take ownership of your life. And I think that is critical for a good life and happiness, because when you feel like it's out of your control, I think you'll never find happiness. It's impossible because it's not yours, right?
Right.
Like a happy life has to be your life. So, and you see this a lot in like the literature, right? Which is the idea, it's taking control of your thoughts, how you interpret things, the beliefs that you hold, right? Holding yourself accountable for what you do, how you respond to things, how you act, your character, all of that. None of this is easy, but in making it your own life, you've, in a sense, right, you're defining yourself, and you're also owning the consequences of that life, which can make it your happy life, right, or a good life. And I think that's really important. It's also important for being grateful too, right? Is recognizing, what's yours and what's, because of you.
Yeah, you definitely hit on a point there with the personal responsibility. Makes me think of all those people you hear about who are in prison camps or something like that, and how they took away all their freedoms, but the one thing they couldn't take away was their freedom of thought, their freedom of choice, and choosing how they were going to deal with that situation.
It's funny, I think it's in either Kierkegaard has a quote, another one, I don't know why, I've been reading Kierkegaard recently, I apologize. But he has a quote where he says, people always argue and debate about the freedom of speech when they have freedom of thought, right? Like, people are always concerned about, freedom to say what you want and so forth and so on, but you have the freedom to think what you want at all times. No one can take that from you, really, no matter what they do, right? Because that's internal.
Yeah.
And I think that's important too, though, right? A lot of times, like, I think a good life is also defining that life for yourself. Because let's be honest, right? Yes, for some people, maybe it is being super wealthy. For some people, it might be family, it might be a core thing that they need. For some people, it might be, I don't know, learning a certain skill or something. The point is, though, it's like, if you know what you need for that good life, you can also be flexible, right? And change it as you need to over time, which I think is important.
Yeah. And also what you say with personal responsibility and your circle of control. Instead of looking for happiness in these externals, like let's just say you want to be rich, okay?
Yeah, right.
So instead of this external thing, your happiness of having $1 million, you can make it something internal, something you actually have control over. Like anytime I take an action that moves me in that direction, that's happiness.
That's a good way to look at it too, right? Because you're making it about things that are really within within your control, right? Because the country could change, stock market could change, everything can change around you that can affect your income or your financial stability, whatever. That's not necessarily in your control. But we always have control over ourselves. We do, and we have control over how we think. I think people forget this too. Like, it's actually amazing. And we were talking about perspective, right? Like, it's actually amazing how effective it can be to change your perspective on something and see it differently, the effect that can have on you and the positivity, right? Like, and even just, have you ever forced yourself to be positive about something? Have you ever tried that?
I have to do it all the time.
Yeah, right? Like, but it's actually an interesting exercise because, we were talking about this before, but, I set myself journaling tasks and stuff each day, and I find it very helpful. But it's funny because I notice, like, if I approach it with the wrong mindset, it becomes a very tedious, difficult, struggle to get through it
Mhm.
when it doesn't make any sense because it's something I'm doing for myself, right?
Yeah.
There's no there's no really anything I'm going to suffer from if I don't do it or if I do it poorly.
Mhm.
So I started to try and just force myself to approach it positively. And it changed it dramatically. It's actually funny, but it shows that we can actually change how we think about things. And that is hugely important, I think, both in terms of taking responsibility for yourself, but in showing you, that when you work on how you think and how you see the world, you also work on what affects you and what really causes you to be upset or be anxious or whatever.
Mhm. Yeah, so do you, Danny, and do you listeners have any choices about how you're going to interpret these trying times towards your happiness?
I will say this, I think it is important sometimes to, when these things that are outside of our control that we recognize do cause us anxiety, like the trying times,
Mhm.
like, the debate, like, the political situation, sometimes it is important to recognize, identify that, and also step away from it.
Mhm.
Like, I actively choose sometimes not to engage with these things because I realize that, what is the end goal? The situation is not going to change, right?
Mhm.
I'm going to just get aggravated, upset, anxious, concerned, worried. And how is that helping me? And I think that's important too, right? To ask yourself that. How is this helping my life?
Mhm.
How is this helping me either progress, get where I want to be? Is it, because really, think about like the news, for instance. If I watch the news and I get really upset and I get really stressed out for 2 hours, I just made myself miserable for 2 hours for no reason.
Mhm.
I mean, I absolutely think it's important to be informed and be on top of what's going on, but to a point.
Mhm.
If it's all I'm thinking about, I am wasting my time, I'm ruining my life, missing out on other things because I'm not present in the moment.
Mhm.
Your brain's somewhere else all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. See, I don't know, probably like 8 or 10 years ago, I gave up social media and I also stopped watching the news because I think I've read about it in like a 4-hour work week or something. But it's funny because a lot of times people ask me, so what do you think about this? And I'm like, I don't know. I never even heard of that. What's going on with that?
I don't know.
And it's actually kind of exciting because I don't get bogged down with all the negative imagery and everything that's on the news. And at the same time, I get all these delightful surprises throughout the day with stuff that I can talk about people with because I have no idea.
Yeah, it's funny actually you mentioned that. So when I first started teaching, I used to think that I should be on top of what's going on, right?
Mhm.
And it's helpful. I can use some of it in my classes and stuff. And anyway, so it was stressing me out, and I realized, I was like, well, wait, I don't need to be on top of everything. I can pick and choose, I can focus, so I would start just looking at things that related to what I was talking about,
Mhm.
and gave up on trying to be on top of everything or stressing about it because it wasn't helping me. And I think in that, to your point, it makes a huge difference in your life, right?
Mhm.
You remove the things that you can't control, you ignore them, and you
Mhm.
focus on what's within your power
Yeah.
and what you have control over.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I guess for me from this these trying times, and if you can count up the number of times we said trying times in this episode and
Yeah,
comment
right?
down below.
1,000?
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's more of being able to choose my adventure. Like, you remember those?
I
you
knew you were
remember,
going to say that. What?
Did you?
Yeah.
You remember those books when you were a kid?
Yeah.
It was like choose your adventure, and you get to go. If
They
if
were
you do this,
RPGs
go,
before RPGs
yeah,
existed.
if you do this, go to page 8. If you choose this, go to page 32.
And you somehow ended up reading the whole thing anyway,
Yeah.
which was funny.
Yeah. Like, I remember back, and there was a time in my life where I legitimately chose to just do whatever made my heart sing. And my life changed so dramatically in such a short period of time, and then I kind of lost that track. So for me, in these times, it's kind of trying to figure out those directions and then just going in those directions, and at the same time not worrying about the result.
Yeah.
Like, focus on the process. The process is going in that direction of stuff that makes my heart sing, and then forgetting about the result.
Well, it's interesting too, right? Because the reality is, even when you do that, you're going to fail at some things and succeed at others. And those failures are not necessarily bad, right? They're always learning experiences and opportunities. but we also we have this tendency to think of failure in this very negative light and run away from it, right? Or abandon things because we fail once. And, so it's also experimenting, trying, and not being afraid to do it again if you have to.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important.
Yep.
It's difficult. I mean, this is not easy. We're all obviously struggling with it, every day.
Yeah.
And like you just said, I think that's one of the worst things too about it is like you can get on the right track and you can have it where like things are going great and somehow you don't even know how, weeks pass and you find yourself seemingly totally off course again. And it's like, what the hell happened?
Yep.
And I think it speaks to the importance of trying to find yourself too. That is crucial, man. Like figuring out what works for you, what you need, and really understanding who you are, because everything in this world really pushes us to be sort of similar or conform to things, ideas, beliefs, whatever, practices. And the more we sort of like lose focus on ourselves, the more we tend to fall into these patterns of social life, and that takes us away from ourselves, or outside. And I think that's also difficult, right? Because it's a constant battle between those two things almost. Like the world wants you to get sucked into the trying times. They want you to watch you to watch the news, to participate, right, in all this stuff because there's money to be made. It's you're sharing in whatever the suffering. I don't know, whatever the hell is going on. And it's like, again, how is that helping you? And think about what you have to be grateful for. And I guarantee you, a lot of times what you have to be grateful for is your own self, right? The things you do, not other stuff outside of you.
Yeah. Yeah. I always think it would be interesting to like grow up in a different culture or a different time, because I mean we both grew up in America and we grew up in a somewhat affluent neighborhood, and so there was always this pressure to be, do, and have more than the other people, and to really excel, and
to evaluate yourself, right, based on others, right, that you're only doing well if you're doing better than everyone else,
right? Yeah,
which is a terrible thing.
Oh, and I was looking at that the other day, that exact thing, where like I compare myself to the curated life of others and I'm a failure. But if I just step back a minute and compare myself to myself previously, years ago, it's like clear winner.
Yeah, right?
Like clearly a winner.
Yeah,
no competition.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Doing much better.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point too, right? And I think that's such a danger of the time we live in right now too, which is this whole like only presenting a curated life, only presenting like this certain point of view on something, right? And making yourself, everyone online is making themselves look better, look great. Like they act like, I mean, sometimes it's funny, like I was looking online at some of these accounts for self-help and stuff, and like it seems as if these people 24/7, all they do is work on themselves.
Right.
And like, that's not true.
Yeah.
Like, give me a break. People are real people.
Yeah.
And they have their ups and downs, and I think you have to sort of be mindful of that and watch yourself. It's difficult though, because it also means being aware of yourself like a lot.
Yeah.
And it's not easy.
Yeah. And here's one of the fallacies of the mind that I found really interesting. So like we see these celebrities and whatever, and our mind makes up a story about what their life is like.
Yeah.
And one interesting parallel is at work. So I've been through the whole COVID thing. I've still been working as a vet, but everybody's been wearing a mask. And my mind has made up what they look like underneath their mask. And there are people who are new hires who I've never seen their face except for their eyes. And then I'll see their face the first time, and I'm like, oh my God, I had
totally different.
Nothing like what I thought you looked in my mind.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's funny though too, because you fill it in, and it's weird too. I notice I'll think back on a situation and I don't even remember the masks, even though, especially when it first started, and everybody had them on.
Yeah.
It was like my brain was filling it in without them. It's kind of interesting how you think about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
I don't know, happiness is a tough one though.
Cool.
Well,
So
yeah.
Anything else today? Anxiety and happiness.
I think if there's any takeaway, I guess try and pay attention to your wants, your needs. Try and get closer to yourself. Be grateful and ignore things that you can't have any control over, or that you don't have control over, because they're just really evaluate. I guess that's a good way to look at it. Is evaluate the things in your life that are really bringing you down and wasting your time that you have no control over, because those are the immediate things you can cut out, right?
Yeah.
Especially if it's like stuff like engaging with the news or social media about things you have no control over. That's easy to address in a way, and bring yourself a little bit more happiness.
Yeah. Just take the time to move away from the bad and move towards the good.
Yeah. Practice, right?
How about that? Yeah.
Practice and work on yourself.
Simple as that. Isn't it crazy?
It's
the
always-
truths are always simple.
They're very simple, but somehow very difficult.
Yeah.
I think it's because of the social world. I really do. I really do. But hey, what are you going to do?
Yeah. All right.
All right.
Well, good episode today.
Yeah, good talking to you, Randy.
Yeah, absolutely. You too, Danny. And we'll see you all again next week.
Absolutely.
For another episode. We'll figure out what then.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
All right.
Peace.